Welcome to our discussion here at secondstreet.org. We all know that Canada is going through some tough economic times right now. We are spiraling into deeper debt, and we know that's not sustainable. So, to help me find out what is going to be sustainable in the future, I'm joined by three excellent guests. Joining me now are Joanna Barron. She is with the Canadian Constitution Foundation. Laura Jones with the CFIB, and Deidra Garyk. She's a Canadian energy advocate in Calgary. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to try to give some real world examples here in Canada about the way we think we can get back on track as a country. Laura, I'm going to start with you. I know I can just imagine the talks that you've been in with Canadian small and independent businesses across this country over the past several weeks. Have you seen some major changes that you would like to see after this lockdown lifts? What can we do to get Canada back on track?
Yeah, it's an important question, and I think it's an important qualification after the lockdown lifts, because right now, of course, small businesses across Canada are extremely stressed, and the world is really upside down in that what we're seeing on our surveys is, while typically business owners would say, just keep taxes reasonable and kind of stay out of our way, right now they need a lot of help from government, and unfortunately, we're not on the other side of that yet. But as businesses get back, hopefully back to a new normal and to making more sales again, there's an important question about what do business owners think government should focus on as we get into the economic recovery mode of this? And we actually asked our 110,000 members across Canada that very question, and very close to the top of the list was something simple and cost-effective governments can do, and that is make a concerted effort to get rid of red tape. That is just something that it didn't make sense pre-COVID, but now in COVID times, when you've got governments telling businesses, well, you have to wait 30 days for that approval to do the work sharing plan that might help you save an employee, makes even less sense. When you've got stressed out business owners trying to figure out what record of employment code to use, and they have to deliver things in person, and governments are scrambling to deal with that kind of stuff. There's a lot of cleanup that needs to be done on the red tape side, and I think that will benefit businesses and individuals, frankly, right across businesses of all sizes and individuals right across Canada.
I have to agree with you. I was just speaking with a gentleman a few weeks ago in Prince Edward Island. He co-owns a pub, and the very fact that they were allowed to sell beer and alcohol with their food orders just at takeout meant he was able to hire back wait staff. Like just that one change. And so really encouraging to hear that from your people.
Yeah, that's right. Another good example along the same lines that you're talking about is patios. The city of Vancouver, for example, has said, okay, you can get your permit in 48 hours and we'll have a simplified, streamlined process. Well, I think they could probably do even more streamlining than that. Really, why do you even need a permit to have a patio? As long as you're not blocking the sidewalk, why don't you just let business owners do it?
Exactly. Just set up the tables and chairs and let it go. Deidra, I wanted to pick your brain on this as well. We know the vital role that natural resources, things like mining, oil and gas, play here in Canada. What role do you see our energy sector playing as far as increasing our bottom line and really helping keep it healthy post-COVID?
I think the energy sector is really important, and we need all forms of reliable, affordable energy, and we need the sector to thrive for the good of the entire country. I think that we can't just look at it as a regional issue in Alberta or Saskatchewan. I think that if anything, COVID has reinforced the importance of having access to energy when we need it. So energy security, energy self-sufficiency. So those things I think are very important. Canada is very lucky to have resources, but there's also the financial side of things. In 2019, mineral exports, which includes oil, were $130 billion. It's going to be very, very important for the recovery. Our current government is spending a lot due to the COVID issues. However, they were consistently increasing their spending over the years. And so we need industries that can carry their own weight to thrive. Additionally, we have the opportunity to export to countries around the world, to people who don't have access to reliable, affordable forms of energy. We can be world leaders in that. Additionally, we can also be world leaders in clean tech. And we can do that through a financially viable, functioning oil and gas and energy sector in Canada. We're already doing a lot of this. Calgary ranked in the top 15 in the world in 2019 for clean tech ecosystems, and that's measured by a San Francisco-based company. So we already have the expertise, and we can build off what we already do really well. And I think that is going to be really valuable and important for the post-COVID recovery.
For sure. I know here at secondstreet.org and in my other role with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, the role that things like oil and gas play for our tax base is amazing. It is oil and gas often that pays for things like schools and hospitals. A lot of folks, unfortunately, don't seem to know that. So it's definitely going to play a big role going forward. I wanted to ask you, Joanna, and to pick your brain here, as far as human enterprise goes, liberty, freedoms, those sorts of things here in Canada, are you seeing anything in your role with your group that is being really negatively affected by COVID? And is there a way to turn that around after COVID? Is there a way to ease up on some of these restrictions in a way that really helps Canada's economy going forward?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, human enterprise is a very uplifting topic and one of my favorite topics, but the example that most immediately comes to mind is the situation in our healthcare system. Now, we already have the longest waiting times of any Western country. 20% of Canadians wait more than 4 months for a medically necessary surgery, as compared to 0% of people in Germany. We have a very poorly performing system, and we also have the only system in the Western world that outlaws all forms of private pay health insurance or health services. Now, the reason why this has been exacerbated in the pandemic is we've heard from many Canadians who have had their surgeries delayed, canceled indefinitely due to need to free up space during the pandemic. This means that in Ontario alone, where I live, an estimated 50 people have already died due to delayed surgeries. And I really just think that this pandemic has been a watershed moment that has shown how unsustainable our healthcare system is. We have a growing population that's very different than the Canada that existed when Tommy Douglas introduced Medicare for All. And in fact, allowing a private option release valve, in addition to bringing more wealth into our country, because we know that probably hundreds of thousands of Canadians already go abroad to seek private treatment every year. So we could bring that money into our economy. We could have people from other countries coming to Canada for our world-class doctors, research scientists, and facilities, as well as release pressure from the public system. So the government ban on any form of private insurance, the government ban on a private individual who wants to take his or her health into her own hands and seek private treatment is absolutely unconscionable. The law suggests that it's a violation of our charter right to life, liberty, and security of the person. And the Canadian Constitution Foundation has a landmark constitutional case about this. And the last thing that I would note is that, ironically, the BC government, which estimates it will take up to 2 years to catch up on the backlog caused by COVID-related canceled surgeries, is now subcontracting to private clinics which exist in the province, which are the same clinics whose existence they have been challenging in the litigation. So I really just hope that this is an opportunity for Canadians to come to our senses and make a decision that's best for our health and for our collective prosperity.
Just to circle back on that just briefly, in a technological way of looking at it, for example, I was speaking with a doctor just the other day who said that she really liked doing telehealth conferences with her patients, that it freed up her waiting room. She didn't need to worry about patients potentially getting sick while waiting to get her treatment. And she was able to do a lot of video conferencing. And she also said that her patients liked being able to renew over the phone or online with her. Do you see technology perhaps playing a role going forward after this of easing things up a little bit with our healthcare system as well?
Absolutely. It serves the interest of people who have a difficult time leaving their homes, who are at risk of infection. It's cost efficient. And again, in this case, necessity is the mother of invention and has forced a lot of aspects of our healthcare system to get with the times. This is not the only area where we see things that have been occasioned by the public health emergency, like curbside alcohol pickup, industry being able to pivot to making hand sanitizer. elimination of liquids limits on flights, things like that. And so one of the silver linings is that we've seen many areas where government has been able to ease up regulations, and perhaps they should just do so permanently because it seems to suit everybody very well.
Laura, I wanted to go back to you on that. When it comes to independent businesses, are you seeing technology playing a role here on helping ease things up a little bit for them, especially post-COVID? Is there anything other than a patio, for example, which I think is a great idea? Are there other examples that some of these businesses are bringing to your attention post-COVID that they want to see government just stop doing and getting out of the way? Is there any other red tape that we can cut?
Well, it's interesting that even pre-COVID, CFIB does a Red Tape Awareness Week every year. And I was looking back at we do a Red Tape Challenge to governments, and our Red Tape Challenge this year was Axe the Facts, and literally was about, let's go from inline, to online for governments, because so many processes still require that you either physically go a location, like in Toronto, where if you want to get a business license, a new business license, you have to actually go to one physical location to get that license.
You do?
And when we ask business owners, so many of them, yeah, seriously, like I know what decade are we in? We actually were joking about it. We said 1975 called and wants its business licensing process back, right? So there's still these ridiculous examples out there. And so many business owners were telling us, why do I still need a fax machine? It's 2020 to deal with government. So I'm going back to to January here, but it's even more relevant now, I think, than it was before, to make things simple. Put them online. Government websites can be a nightmare to navigate. Like, governments really need to modernize. And I think that this crisis has kind of really, we knew that before, but just how critical that has been underscored for a lot of people. And there are a lot of processes that just don't need to exist. So I think about, we actually gave an award to the city of Langford for saying, when you do your business license, it's one and done. You don't need to repeat it every year. You don't need to even, go back to City Hall, or even if that's online. Like, there's a lot of just unnecessary stuff that, to Joanna's point, I think we need to rethink what it is we're trying to do and how we best get there. People sometimes confuse more rules for more safety, but actually when rules get really complicated and difficult to navigate, that makes us less safe.
Yes, because people won't know how to do them properly and something will get missed.
Yeah, and they can't pay attention to the most important rules. It's been incredible to see how fast governments have had to move to get various programs out. So it shows you what is possible. I'm not saying they're doing a perfect job at it, but I think hopefully this has kind of helped many in government understand that sometimes you can't make the perfect the enemy of the good, and you've got to keep things, reasonable, and you've got to keep things moving.
Exactly, especially post-COVID. Just taking a look at the debt clock, for example, with the Taxpayers Federation, we don't know if we have enough room on it. Really, like, we don't know, technologically speaking, if we're going to have enough room on it just for the federal debt alone. And so we're going to have to really be able to free up businesses to do their thing, do what they're great at doing, in order to try to climb back out of this. I wanted to come back to you, Deidra, to take a look at Canadian energy. Is there something specific that you would like to see governments do or stop doing when it comes to enabling Canadian energy, and especially getting Canadian energy out to market in a way that will help our economy and bottom line? Is there something specific you'd like to see from them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's quite a few things that can be done. I'll start with sort of this prevalent misconception that seems to get bandied about by the climate activist groups, and that is that there's just little to no regulation for producing oil and gas in Canada, and that's just simply not true. So one of the ways that governments can help is to set regulations that are necessary, not duplicative or unnecessarily onerous and costly without adding value. I guess it goes back to the red tape issues. We do have a lot of regulations in oil and gas. And there's not always consistency of standards across industries, and there certainly isn't consistency for imported oil and gas products. The oil and gas industry spent $25 billion between 2006 and 2016 on environmental protection. And that's about 42% of all of the money that was spent on environmental protection within that time frame. So we have a lot of regulations that we have to adhere to. The other thing that I think is also really important is, particularly at the federal level, we need a certain level of clarity, particularly because I see the responsibility for our national projects like interprovincial pipelines being abdicated to the courts and judges, and therefore we need some level of certainty around the rules, such as consultation. Like, what does enough mean? When is it going to be adequate? Those are really subjective terms, and it makes it really easy to move the goalposts to meet political agendas. And I just don't see that being beneficial for anyone in the country. And then one of the things that I think they can do that's sort of the most near and dear to my heart as an energy advocate is that governments across the country at all levels can state their support for the energy sector and acknowledge the value of oil and gas. They need to speak out against mistruths and defamatory statements, or in some cases, they just need to not make them, like we've seen with some of our leaders recently. Because if we don't speak up proudly and have a sense of pride in the environmental and human relation accomplishments of our energy sector, we're going to continue to see movements like the fossil fuel divestment movement and other movements that are rather misguided. They'll gain more traction, and that's not going to be good for any of us.
Are you seeing similar things to Laura when you're speaking with energy folks in the energy sector? Do you hear from folks who say that they need to reapply over and over again, or duplicate red tape or duplicate regulations over and over again in the energy sector as well?
Yes, there certainly are. I mean, I don't work directly with the regulations, but one of my coworkers has a series of binders, and she's got 3 giant binders stacked up, and they're the regulations from municipal, provincial, and federal levels. And you have to know what they are, and sometimes they sort of duplicate, sometimes they contradict each other, and it's complex to understand what you have to do, but it's also very expensive, and it delays a progress in terms of being able to drill your wells or get your product to market.
So clarifying and streamlining those regulations would probably help.
Yes, it absolutely would. As well as giving us the ability to get our product to market, like our egress. I think that's one that's been in the news a lot. And it's not only to help the environment, but I think it helps with geopolitical stability. If Canada can get its product to different countries, we're a stable, reliable regime, unlike a lot of producers. Like, I just think back to Russia cutting off the Ukraine, cutting off natural gas to the Ukraine a couple of years ago in the dead of winter for a number of days. Canada we wouldn't do that. That's just not the type of country we are. We don't use it as a bargaining chip. And so I think that's where our government's getting out of the way. It can help us on the world stage as well.
And Joanna, I wanted to wrap up with you here. In regards to medicine, we hear that, and we hear that at secondstreet.org as well. We know that folks go overseas quite often for surgery or healthcare, and they pay for it. So not only does that mean that people are having to leave Canada to get the healthcare that they need, their money is going with them. Apart from the medical side of things and healthcare side of things, is there any other element right now within our economy that your team is focusing on during COVID that you really want to see change post-COVID? Is there some other restriction on human enterprise that you think needs to be eased here?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of trade barriers within our own provinces, which is surprising to most Canadians, because actually the Constitution guarantees free trade in between provinces. And we led evidence in one of our trials a year back, Como, in which a man was fined $750 for crossing the border between Quebec and New Brunswick for bringing some beer over. That provision of the Constitution really was intended to create a country that enjoyed free trade between our wonderful diversity of natural resources that our country has, some of which Deidra spoke about, of course, oil and gas, but we have such geographical diversity. And I think particularly given the climate in the world, this is a good time for us to look at our supply chains, how we produce the things that we need, and really double down on the most efficient way that we can trade between provinces. So it starts with something as small as protectionist barriers that mean that I could not order a case of wine from the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia to be delivered to Ontario, but it's much larger than that. And what we want to say to Canadians is that, in our opinion, and in legal historians' opinion, your constitution guarantees that. Governments need to get their hands out of the piggy bank, which is really why they're so desperate to hold on to these protectionist measures.
I can just imagine the businesses that could crop up just by allowing for that to happen, and the amount of money that could be moved around. I'll wrap up now by asking each of you briefly, what are you bracing for? And what are you hopeful for? Very quickly. Laura, when you wake up in the morning, what are you bracing yourself for? And more positively, what are you hopeful for when you look to the future post-COVID?
Well, I think bracing for that, while I think we shut down very quickly, the sort of coming back is going to be a lot slower than, it's not flipping a switch, right? Coming back, I think, is going to be a lot slower than many would like in terms of the economic recovery. I think that's going to take longer than what we want. But what I'm hopeful for is that in many ways, this is proving to be a bit of a reset and a rethink of some assumptions that we maybe have, like, for example, that, the bigger the stack of rules, the safer we are. I mean, I think that doesn't make any sense. And I think the COVID era is kind of exposing just how little sense that makes, and how being nimble and being adaptable is important. And it's important for governments to be responsive and to kind of get with the modern era. And so maybe we'll be able to leapfrog some of what's been very, very slow in terms of governments modernizing its own systems, because I think there's a new awareness that, that just doesn't work in a pandemic, and we need to be better, we need to be better equipped.
Very, very well put. Deidra, what are you bracing yourself for, and what are you hopeful for after we're through all of this?
Well, being in the energy sector in Canada, I'm continuing to brace for what seems to be an ever ongoing downturn within Alberta and the energy sector in general. But that being said, I'm fairly optimistic that consumption will be going back up to where it's typically been. But I'm also very hopeful that the pandemic has created a bit of awareness around energy and the importance and value of it. And so hopefully we can quiet some of those very radical activist voices who maybe don't have the best of intentions. And hopefully we can get good policy through a citizen engagement, understanding the value of the energy sector, trying to get the political leaders and decision makers to make good decisions, both for the current energy needs that we have, as well as the energy transition of the future.
Other countries and other jurisdictions actually had a rainy day fund built up, often based off of their natural resources. That certainly would have been nice to have had here in Canada pre-COVID, but hopefully going in the future, we will be able to build that up. Joanna, I'll give you the last word here. What are you bracing yourself for, and what are you most hopeful for?
I'm bracing myself for the stack of emails I wake up to every day from people who live in provinces whose borders have been closed, even to other Canadians who are angry at my comments in the media that these are unconstitutional and frankly offensive to the notion of confederation. I assume that those comments are motivated by their fear. But I'm hopeful, again, that the whole context of how we regulate, how we do business, how we view our healthcare system, which is so precious to our country, how we envision how we want to trade and live with each other, and also how the rule of law will sustain us through all of this, and our great traditions. I'm confident that those things are the things about our tradition as a nation that will prevail, and will be freer and more stable for it.
It's an excellent way to put it. I always have hope in human enterprise and our ingenuity and the ability for people to get out there and do good things. And so I'm always trying to stay hopeful, especially as we go into the post-COVID world. And it's because of great ideas like this that I have hope that we'll be able to get back on track here in this country. Thank you all very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.